Welcome back to the Prairie Public Weekly Web Chat. I'm Darcy Bakkegaard, and I'm excited because November, every Thursday, we're going to be sharing some strategies to help you flip or blend your classroom. And this is very exciting to me because I think this will really help increase engagement and productivity for your students, but also help keep things more interesting, dynamic, and fun for you, the instructor. By flipping your classroom, by blending your classroom, it frees up other instructional time so that you can have more hands-on time with your students, which is really the goal of teaching. So today starts our series, and the goal of today's little video is to get us into the mindset of why flipped and blended learning can be very beneficial in the classroom. So we'll share a few different ideas and general strategies, and then starting next week, we'll dive into some of the tech tools that can really make your life much easier while tackling and trying flipped or blended learning. We're going to get started with this short 6-minute video that just talks through some of the basic mechanics of flipped classroom and blended learning, the philosophy, the why. All of these things are things that you will also hear from another teacher after that 6-minute video. So feel free to skip ahead, but I do encourage you to listen to it. It's pretty simple, but it's a nice reminder of the framework of why flipped and blended learning can be so helpful for students as well as teachers.
Blended learning is a way of teaching that combines online resources with in-person instruction to create a more personalized learning environment. With blended learning, instructors often make some or all of the content available to the students outside of class time. Taking this to the extreme, students can consume all of the traditional lecture material at home at their own pace, and during class time they could complete work assignments traditionally given as homework during class, as well as other activities like team-based or project-based learning. This describes the flipped classroom model because it flips what students do at home and in the classroom. Typically, when a teacher creates a lecture, they have to make an educated guess about the knowledge level of their audience, since they have limited information about what each student knows or remembers. If a lecture is too difficult, then most of the students will be lost. If it's too easy, then most of the students will be bored. So teachers typically end up lecturing to the mythical middle of the class and hoping for the best. By putting their content online, students can move at their own pace. Those who are familiar with the material can go through it quickly, even watching it at an increased speed. While others who aren't as familiar with it can pause to take notes, re-watch it, or call up other resources to help them understand a concept being explained. An additional benefit for all students is that they can choose to engage with the material when they're most alert, which satisfies both the early bird and the night owl. And for those students that have disabilities, they can take the breaks that they need without having to worry about missing out or distracting others. Putting work assignments back in the classroom also has a number of benefits from a learning science perspective. A lot of students describe the frustration of feeling like they understand a concept in class, but then being confused when they go home and try to apply it to an assignment. This is also supported by research. We learn best through active work, not passive listening. Doing work assignments during class time means that teachers are available when students need them the most, when they're trying to apply their knowledge. Another place where students traditionally struggle is with out-of-class group work, because it can be hard to coordinate an in-person meetup as well as make sure those meetings are constructive. Moving group work into the classroom setting makes the logistics straightforward, and it also allows the instructor to keep an eye on group meetings and to help facilitate them if needed. An important aspect of all blended learning environments is that they're not intended to do away with face time in the classroom. Unlike online classes, where all of the material and interactions are online, blended classrooms count on face-to-face interactions between students and teachers. Instead of getting rid of these interactions, blended learning structures are intended to optimize them, moving the teacher from a passive sage on the stage who delivers didactic lectures to a large audience to a more active role as a guide on the side, who interacts one-on-one with students to help guide them in ways that might be impractical or impossible with a traditional teaching model. By doing this, blended learning classes move from a teacher-focused learning model to a student-focused learning model. In a traditional classroom, the approach is generally time-based, meaning the whole class moves at the same pace. All students get the same lesson on the same day and are tested on that material at the same time. And then they all move on to the next topic regardless of their individual exam performance or if they have gaps in their knowledge. Blended classrooms are flexible enough to allow the use of a mastery-based model. It acknowledges that not all students are going to get the material at the same time. Some students might need more time to understand a topic, while at other times those same students will speed ahead. By giving students as much time as they need on a topic and letting them decide when they're ready to be tested, blended classes can help to ensure that students move forward only when they've shown that they can apply what they've learned with confidence. Blended learning, though, like any teaching approach, brings with it some important challenges. Because this approach depends on technical resources, they have to be affordable, reliable, and easy to use for both the students and the teachers. Oftentimes, there's also a learning curve that has to be navigated, especially for those that have never used technology in the classroom. Another challenge is making sure that the materials are being reliably and independently consumed by the students, and they're coming to class prepared. This can be incentivized by closely tying in-class work assignments to the content that's being delivered online, and can often be tracked with learning platforms. Finally, one of the biggest challenges to blended learning is that it really changes the role of the teacher to that of a coach and puts students in the driver's seat of their own learning, teaching them how to think as well as what to learn. This shift is an important one and requires buy-in from both the teacher and the student to be successful. When it's done right, though, blended learning can lead to a much more enjoyable and effective learning experience for both parties. All right, so as a quick recap, blended learning combines online resources with in-person instruction. And one type of blended learning is the flipped classroom, where students consume their lecture resources at home and spend class time doing in-class activities. This allows the teacher to change from a passive sage on the stage to a more active guide on the side, facilitating a student-focused learning model.
This to me is a great basic reminder that when you're thinking about what to flip in your classroom, a simple starting point is to really focus in on Bloom's taxonomy and the things that are lower order, instructional, content, knowledge. Those are the things that would be great to have in flipped content, allowing you to work with students as they approach the higher level, higher order thinking on Bloom's taxonomy. Well, thanks for being here, Corey.
Absolutely, anytime.
Oh, I wanted to talk to you about flipped classroom because you use it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I know you do it a lot.
Yeah.
So what do you teach and where?
I teach high school math and specifically Algebra 1, AP Calculus, and a remedial math class at West Fargo High School.
I, as an English teacher, never really thought about flipped classroom because it felt like, well, I give students things to read at night and then we talk about it in class. Isn't that already flipping my classroom? But the more I thought about it, there were more things that I was like, well, I could be innovating. What was your journey? Like, how did you get to flipped classroom?
So as a teacher, I've been teaching for about 6 or 7 years now. And my first couple of years, like many new teachers, is hard. It's difficult to manage all the other things that you don't talk about when you're just studying your curriculum, like all the classroom management of attendance, and a student comes rushing in late or whatever else happens. And it becomes difficult to manage all that. And so for me, I felt like there just wasn't enough time in the day to do what I wanted to do in my class. And so as I was, reading through different professional development resources or going to different conferences, I came across the flipped classroom, and I thought that sounds like a pretty neat idea with technology to record yourself and not only just to have more class time, but to be able to have students access the lectures whenever they need to was a really big impetus for me to say, hey, maybe I should give this a shot. And so it's been a really cool experience for me. I've gotten to learn how to use a lot of different other technologies that I otherwise would not have. I won't promise that it's all sunshine and rainbows, because there's definitely times where students are students. And what I mean by that is, even if it's the flipped classroom, there's always, the equivalent of forgetting your textbook or forgetting your worksheet. There's always going to be some mishaps that go along with doing this. But it's been a good experience for me so far.
Since there are so many questions I have for you, but since you just mentioned that of forgetting the textbook, how have you navigated that of flipped classroom and students being able to watch videos is dependent on them being able to access those videos outside of school, or certainly outside of class time? How have you navigated that in helping make sure that your students can get the content that you're wanting them to get?
And so typically what I end up doing is I first try to find an option during the school day where they can go to the library or go use a computer that has internet access that I know will work. The other alternative is to just ensure that they have a smartphone or some other device that has access to the internet, which is typically a big majority of my students. But there are still some that don't have a smartphone, don't have a free hour. What do you do? We're piloting right now a program at West Fargo High School, and I know that's Fargo South High School or maybe Fargo North, I'm not sure. Another North Dakota high school already has this program in place where they work in tandem with a Midco or a Cable One internet provider to
Fargo Public Schools. The whole Fargo Public Schools does that.
Right, and so it allows for students to rent a mobile access point and have wireless internet at home. And I don't know the specifics of that, and so that'd be a great question for a Fargo Public School teacher to learn more about that. But that's really what I would come back to, is to try to get them internet access in some device. We are currently piloting a one-to-one program where we don't have devices in student hands at all times yet, but I know that a lot of Fargo Public Schools do. And yeah, inevitably, so I'm just getting to the point, what if they just can't do it? What if I just can't get them the technology, they don't have wireless internet? Well, then I try to have moments in my class where I do still instruct students on what I wanted them to learn. I would say that my class period is not devoid of direct instruction. I still sprinkle it in every now and then. If I know that students haven't watched the videos or there's a lot of trouble with the videos, then I won't punish them for that, right? I mean, it happens. I want to make sure that they have an opportunity to learn from me no matter what.
But like you said, one of the biggest advantages of the flipped classroom is it gives you time and space. So when you do have to reteach, or when you do have that opportunity to reteach, if a kid was absent, if they didn't have technology, or if they didn't show proficiency on any formative assessment as you're coming back into the classroom, you don't have to reteach to everyone.
Right.
Because of flipped classroom, how has that helped change how you set up your class and how you work through content after students have watched a video? What does that look like then when they come to the classroom the next day?
Sure. When they come in, what usually happens is that we have a class starter as always. I get them in that routine, so I try not to waste any time. And that class starter typically focuses on what they learned the night prior, like what was the video on. And so if they get stuck, I encourage them to work with their partners. But again, obviously at the end of the starter, there's some people who I know still don't get it and they don't understand from their partners. So what I can do is I have a cart in my room of laptop devices. And if students have their own earphones, they can go in the back of the room and they can watch the videos while I instruct the rest of the class in whatever activities they have to do. Typically, I do a pretty traditional flipped classroom where I'll do some activities or some exploration, but then the second half of the course is usually just doing the homework or doing practice exercises. So during that practice time, that allows me to go around to the students who maybe finished watching the video and I want to check in with them like, hey, do you understand? And I'm able to reach more students that way.
Now, do your students, because I don't remember this, do you also have a math textbook that they're working with?
I do have a textbook. I don't use it very frequently. If I do use it, it's only for in-class exercise or in-class practice. And so I keep a set in my room just on the right side. And I might say after we're done with our activities, like, okay, grab a textbook and let's use this time to complete this assignment. But not typically at home.
Sure. I could see, like, if people are trying to figure out and wanting to test flipped classroom for a lot of the things that I would use it for as an English teacher, like how to embed. I could very much see myself doing like my grammar activities as a series of videos instead of doing those as direct instruction or lecture. And I started thinking about flipped classroom. What are the lectures that I as an English teacher give every single year? And particularly, what are the concepts that I kind of expect students to already have prior knowledge of? So in-text citations, like writing papers. By the time I have kids as seniors, they have been learning how to do parenthetical citations since about 4th grade. They start learning in-text citations. So flipped classroom for me, I started thinking of it as, well, what is something that I kind of expect them to already know, but I always end up reteaching them and reviewing it? Is there a way that I could offer that as a review video, assign it, do a formative assessment on it, and then only have to, as you just said, only have to network with the kids that need some remediation? But now, instead of a 15, 30-minute lesson in class on in-text citations, they watch a 7-minute video. The kids who are good to go, they come to class and they just start writing their paper. The other kids who didn't do so well on the formative assessment, I can work with those kids specifically, make sure they really understand how to do the in-text citations. And if I was unsure about technology, that in-text citation, that's something that I could also give a kid a handout. And it wouldn't be the same as the video, but in a pinch, like in those case scenarios, for kids who can't access the video, I could certainly give them some reading material that goes through, and I have a PowerPoint that, like, when I made my video, I could print off my PowerPoint so that kid who doesn't have technology at home, if I know about that kid, I can make a strategy. So that's why I was asking about the math textbook.
Sure.
If a kid, worst case scenario, they can't access the videos at home, I was expected in high school to read my math textbook. I'm not saying that I always did. And certainly math was something that was so much clearer to me when someone was demonstrating it than reading a textbook was very confusing. But at least bare minimum, there would be a textbook that they could go through to get some of the information if technology at home just isn't an option.
Right, and I will clarify too that I use a smart board. It's a Promethean board, actually. I guess I shouldn't mix those two brands up, but I usually print out my PDF notes that are completed as a PDF file and upload them to our learning management system. At West Fargo High School, we use Schoology. Other people use Canva or Blackboard or something equivalent to that. And I try to post those notes for students. And again, that can be hit or miss because, well, you don't have access to the internet. You can't print those off. You can't go to the website. But I have the opportunity then to just print off the PDF for them, like you were mentioning, and just give them a PDF of worked out examples with some annotation on it. So that way, hopefully, it's a little bit more clear than just a textbook because you can see my handwriting. It's a little bit more clear what my thought process was through the example.
And it guides through the steps. I think for some teachers, the scariest thing about flipping their classroom is the technology component of both as a user, like I as a teacher, I'm not sure how to use this technology, but also on the receiver end. So I appreciate just you humoring me of going through some of those what ifs, because I do think this is something that a teacher could do. And certainly to me, the idea of blended learning is similar to flipped classroom, of kind of having some technology. So even if you don't totally flip your classroom, it would be conceivable to have your videos, like if you didn't have devices for everyone and you knew that half your kids didn't have internet at home, you could set up a couple stations in your classroom, right? Where kids are doing different math concepts, different math tasks. And at one station, they're watching an instructional video. And maybe that's the last station of the day, or the thing that you have to do last, because that video is going to set up what you're going to do tomorrow or something. But I think there are other strategies that if we as teachers are creative about how we implement the flip, we can get the benefits of flipped classroom, even if all of our kids don't have devices.
Right, and that's a great point to make, because I know that for schools that aren't as large or don't have like convenience of having the plethora of devices like a bigger city does, or city that the larger community has or larger school district has, it is nice to be able to control that element or that variable in your classroom. So I would definitely advocate for people who are in a smaller school district, or maybe don't have access to the technology that you would want, to try to get at least a little bit in your classroom, so that way you can do the blend and have something in there. I know that there are some teachers in our building who have desktop computers in their classroom, and they're used for that exact purpose, where the student will go around and if it's in a study hall, perfect. If it's not in a study hall, I know that some teachers will have them still do it in their classroom during their class, because there's just some things where you can't move on unless you have the prior knowledge.
Right. I like that suggestion though too, for teachers who are wondering, well, how can I do the flip? How can I flip my classroom if not all of my kids? Partner with your study hall teachers. Partner with some of those people. Make sure that those people who are supervising study halls, I just got an email last week from an English teacher who was saying the study hall teacher in our school is sick of kids playing games on their phones during study hall and wants some educational games that they could be doing. I don't think that's a unique problem to one school, that kids don't know how to use their study hall time. And I get it, not every kid has a study hall, but that's yet one more resource. Find out who is in charge of different study hall periods and make sure that they know how to access your videos so they can also be helping kids. Study halls are another great time where kids could be doing that. And like you said, if they have a free period, West Fargo doesn't require juniors and seniors, if they're in good standing, to have a study hall, but they might have a free period where they can go into the library. So to network with a few of those adults, to make sure some of those adults know where those videos are and could, in theory, help a kid find them.
Absolutely.
And you haven't always done the flip. What has been the change for your students in this shift to flipping your content?
Well, of course, I've noticed first and foremost that I have a better opportunity to get to talk to the students or to get to know them better when you're working one-on-one. So what I've noticed more is, first of all, I get that better rapport, and I feel like I have a better pulse on what students know, and whether I can definitely say like, okay, at the end of a class before I flipped, I would say, well, I felt like that went pretty well, and I was calling on people. It seemed like they knew what was going on. They're following me, but in the flipped classroom, I might walk around and then they try to do it on their own, right? And that's the big thing, is taking it from the we do to the I do in terms of their gradual release of responsibility. And I think that a lot of times it's easy to follow along with the teacher, and everyone always tells me, well, it's really easy when you go through it and do it, but then I can't do it by myself. And so having a flipped classroom has allowed me to help them through that individual process of being able to do it by themselves, because I'm there to check in, and if they have a question, instead of being lost at home and talking to their parent who maybe might not know anything about math, or trying to navigate the internet to trying to find some help, it's just a lot better to have that opportunity in class.
And like you said, when they don't understand, even if they still didn't understand, they still have that video that they can keep watching. Now the adults who might be trying to help that student, they can watch the video.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a great suggestion. When parent-teacher conferences come up and parents come in, I try to ask them that question, like, if you're sitting down with your son or your daughter, and are you watching the videos with them? Because if they're still struggling, that might be nice to just have somebody, and like you pause it, maybe have a discussion, like, I don't get this, and maybe somebody else who's following along can help fill you in. It's sort of like having that seat partner, and instead of having to ask, Mr. Lovelace what's going on, you could ask somebody next to you, oh, hey, what just happened there? And the nice thing is, I won't keep talking. You could pause me and then come back.
Have you heard from students? Do they rewatch the videos? Is that a resource for them?
I have not heard that specifically, maybe because I haven't asked them, but I do sometimes try to put that out there and say, if you're still struggling, you can watch the videos over again. It's a good study tool before a quiz or before an exam to go back and maybe watch and go through those examples again with the video. But I couldn't tell you for certain how many actually do. I can view on Schoology how often students come in and how often they watch the videos, but timestamps are kind of iffy, and I don't know if it was an accident, and they might say, oh, they had it on for 10 seconds, and like, I don't know, maybe it was an error or something, who knows.
Right,
But
they were trying to message their friend and they accidentally got you.
yeah.
Clicked on the wrong button and opened something.
Yeah, and I guess bottom line is, if the thing I'm trying to teach young people in my classroom is how to take initiative and how to, manage their own learning, the best thing that I can do is give them, a plethora of opportunity, right? I mean, before it used to be, well, if you miss class, I can't recreate the entire class for you. Or you miss that worksheet, well, I can't, I can get to that worksheet again, but the flipped classroom allows me to give students opportunities to take ownership of their own learning and not necessarily put it all on me. And if I'm not there, the whole thing falls apart. And really, it's just the whole premise comes down to that argument of being the sage on the stage or being the person who's down in the field with the students trying to help them.
That's so well said. I don't know that this is what you were intending, but I like that suggestion. By flipping your classroom and getting into that habit, if you as a teacher do have to be gone, you now have these videos that a sub can use to help instruction. But more importantly, I love what you just said about that empowerment for students. An engineer friend of mine said that to him, there are two types of people in the world: people who have learned how to learn and people who haven't. And because of how fast, I was asking him about his degree in engineering and how much of the training he received in college is still applicable 20 years into his career. And he literally laughed at me and just went, none of it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, there's nothing. He's in computer sciences, and he said there's basically nothing that he learned in college 20 years ago that is still applicable to today. And he said, so here's the really big thing as an engineer, but I think this is true of all people, and I think you just nailed it. We can either help kids learn how to learn or not. Great point. I think that's the best point of flipped classroom, and I hadn't even really thought of that part. You are empowering those students to take charge of their own learning, and then you're able to be the cheerleader. Instead of the sage on the stage, you're able to be the cheerleader standing right next to the kid, supporting them through that learning process, instead of being kind of separate from that learning process. Yeah. It's a weird thing to think that by making a video of yourself or by assigning a video as instruction, that actually allows you to be closer to your students.
Right, it seems like a little juxtaposition there, yeah.
Yeah. But everything you're saying makes sense. Do you have any tips on, once kids are back in the classroom, so they've watched a video, you've assigned a video, and they come in the next day, you do your starting activity. Do you have any tips on how you then help differentiate within the classroom of those kids who did get it when they worked with a partner and those people who didn't?
So one of the best things you can do is try to, there's always grouping by ability level. That's a pretty standard response to that problem where, like you said, you break up the classroom into two different areas, or one is sort of independent work and the other time is, hey, gather around, we're going to do a recitation of this lecture and make sure that you have time to ask me questions. A lot of times I do like to do group work and partner work and just let them talk to each other. A lot of times people don't want to talk to me anymore. That usually helps out. But in terms of I like to do a lot of summarizing, a lot of, partnering up, okay, so my desks are in shoulder partners. And so I have another teacher, Rick Wilson, who works in my building, does a lot of giving people roles. And I think specific partnering or strategic partnering is a really good thing to have, okay, have them summarize. But then, like you said, if they're unable to summarize, what do you do? And so that becomes the point where you have to make a call as an educator. I don't know if I have any specific strategies that work the best with students who haven't learned it, but I just try to like corral them up. And it's much easier to have a pulse on that and do that when you have a flipped classroom, because they have a lot more time to discuss that. You don't have like the 10 minutes at the end of class where it's like, okay, lecture's done. Who doesn't get it? And you have like 5 minutes to hurriedly like tell them like, okay, like what was your problem? And you don't really have the discourse time that you need to really nail down what the problem area is.
That's a great point of just that difference of the time. When you have 30 minutes in order to do that work, it becomes much easier to do that work than if you only had, like your 5 minutes. Do you make most of your own videos at this point, or do you have resources that you find videos from other places?
I would say 99% of the videos are my own. Obviously, Khan Academy has been the leading resource for a lot of educators in mathematics classrooms for a while, just because of the breadth of content that they have on that website, and the recently they've added in practice problems as well. So every now and then, if I see that Khan Academy has a great video on, for instance, calculus, they have a great video on that they explain it in a way that's more lucid or more coherent than what I could maybe do. I'll put that video on there. There's no shame in that as long as you cite the source and you let the students know that this is just a great video that I wanted to show instead of my own. I think students appreciate that for a couple of reasons. It gives them a break from, which is nice. Sometimes just easier to hear it from another person. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I'm cautioning you for is don't make it a regular habit, because if students see that you're getting everybody else through the classroom, they start to lose credibility in you as their teacher. If I'm just shoving Khan Academy in their face every day, they're like, be like, well, Mr. Lovelace, aren't you my math teacher? Aren't you supposed to be the one helping me with this? Because what I might say is going to be different than Khan Academy. And so if they're not used to the same words I use, or the same mannerisms, or the same, just idiosyncratic tendencies I have, it's going to be really hard for them to follow along if I try to teach them.
Like that point that we are the experts, and if for some reason our students don't or can't see us as those experts, that could change that credibility. So I think teachers need to, that's a great advice, of be careful of what you're using or how you're using it, because you still do want to be the expert. And the nice thing is, do you remake videos every year, or do you use some of the same videos like from last year as you go through a concept?
That I usually tend to remake it, but I would say that if you feel comfortable and if it's good enough, don't focus on it so much. I know that some of my colleagues, like I mentioned before, Rick Wilson, who also does a flipped classroom, he's made his videos, and once they're made, it's wonderful because you never have to remake them. And if you make them in a general enough setting, you can change the order. One thing that I did not do is I try to make it too specific. I know that sounds weird, but if you make it too specific and you put it too much in a context, you can't take that video and put it in a different part of the curriculum. And so by saying a date, or by saying a section number, or by saying, anything that's specific to, yesterday or today, that kind of stuff, if you sort of put context in, it actually makes it harder to reuse the video. And so I would caution any first-time video makers to learn from my mistake and try to make the videos general. Just make them what the content is about, make them concise. I think the sweet spot's less than 15 minutes, and the software I use free, it has a time limit of 15 minutes, which is great. And so, yeah, that's what I would mention with regards to making the videos.
You'll hear different things from different people, but the basic information that I've read and I try to stick to when you're making a video or using a video for instructional purposes in the classroom is a minute to a minute and a half per grade level. So if you're teaching 10th graders, they can handle a video that's about 10 to 15 minutes long. And that is really the max. But I agree with Corey that keeping them shorter, if you can do the instructional video in 5 minutes, remember kids can rewatch it. So if you can give them 1 or 2 examples and your basic overview instruction in less than 10 minutes, as close to that 5 as possible, you're going to have a much higher view rate on behalf of your students.
Those are great, very solid, reasonable tips. So I'm having some technical difficulties on my end, and I know you have a student who wants your assistance, and that's what we're talking about today, is helping better helping our students. So thanks very much for sharing these insights, just your experience of implementing flipped classroom.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you.
Hopefully that gives you a few ideas to get you started and shift your mindset into why flipped classroom and blended learning can be so beneficial to you as an instructor and to your students as you're guiding them through the learning process. Next week, we will dive into some simple tech tools that can make the flip much easier and make your life as an instructor much easier. And then the following week, we'll dive into a couple tools to produce and record our own videos to further flip and blend our classroom. We'll see you next time.